be recording this webinar, please. So a number of persons indicated that they will be unable to participate. And so we'll be recording this webinar. I hope you don't mind. Your microphones have been muted and so as your videos, but you will be allowed when the chat section of the agenda comes around to be able to speak, but we encourage you to use the chat to post your notes and your messages and your greetings. And we are going to be asking you to raise your hand during the chat session with the button. And we hope you will have a good session. Our agenda for the day, we'll begin with opening remarks by Mrs. Paloma Merodio. She's the president of UNGJAM Americas. And we have Helen Kerfoot, our honorary chair, representing Ongegan. And then our program continues. We'll get into the body of our work for the next 2 hours. We'll have a small 5-minute break, and then we'll continue with our discussions. And then we'll have closing remarks from Daniel Takari from ECLAC, because we're all partnering to make this event happen. So without further ado, I'm going to hand over to Paloma. She's the co-chair of UNGJIM Global, which she was recently elected. So clap to you. She now joins a panel, a bureau represent with 3 women. So I'm very happy for that. And of course, we also have another powerful woman, Helen. Helen has served as Ongegan's 6th chair for 10 years. And she has been, of course, awarded for by many institutions for the wonderful work, sterling contribution she has given to the subject of toponymy and geographical name standardization. So over to Paloma, who will be delivering remarks on behalf of UNGJAM Americas and of course CARIGEO, which is her baby. Over to you, Paloma.
Thank you, Cecile, and good morning, everyone. Good afternoon, good night. I'm really happy to be here today because this is a great event that brings, as Cecile said, projects close to my heart. But I think it's not my baby; it's our baby because I mean it's all the UNGGIM community that has made this possible with the support of several partners. And today, thank you to Cecile for making this alignment with Ngegen happen, because I am really glad that we have this space to share and to, I mean, although we are virtually here together, I think this is a very warm welcome that Cecile is giving us, and where we can discuss some of the main topics in terms of geographical name standardization, supporting national development. I am very glad also to be here with Helen and everyone that is in this room that is pushing for strengthening geospatial information in the region, and especially in the Caribbean. So I would like to thank first the organizers of this event. I know that the CARIGEO team has been working very hard. They meet every week to organize these kind of events. And I think that discipline has showed in a really very fruitful collaboration. So thank you for to all the organizers for opening this space for a discussion on these relevant issues at the regional level. As well as I want to also have a recognition of the valuable contribution of all the speakers in this event that will aim to support national mapping and geospatial data management in the Caribbean, to build awareness on the importance of geographical name standardization and the creation of national name authorities. So this event is also designed to improve awareness, increase knowledge and understanding, and strengthening skills in the principles and techniques of geographical names. We will have a special focus, of course, on cultural heritage and practices and procedures in creating and managing geographical names authorities. In this way, this webinar will address the significance and benefits of geographical names, the framework for effective name standardization, legal and administrative requirements, and effective communication and awareness. And I think this is a relevant part in that we are all here together to really improve effective communication, raise awareness among the community, and I hope that once all the presentations are finished, we have a rich discussion on these topics. So no further ado, Cecile, thank you all for being here today. I thank again the organizers, and I hope this webinar is very fruitful for all of you.
Okay, thank you very much, Paloma. We'll immediately move across to Helen. Helen, please take the floor. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Cecile and Paloma. Hello, good morning, afternoon, or evening to everyone. I bring you good wishes from Pierre Jaillard, Chair of Angegen, who regrets not being with us today. So now I have the pleasure of greeting you and giving you a very warm welcome on behalf of Angegen and its Bureau. So having assisted with Angegen training and capacity building around the world, I'm really excited to see so many tuned in today to discuss questions of geographical name standardization supporting national development. Although this webinar was primarily for Caribbean countries, it's wonderful to know that you are participating from so many places, from Fiji to Egypt, from Argentina to Uzbekistan. I also appreciate the efforts of UNGGIM Americas, CARIGEO, Angegen's Working Group on Training Courses and Toponymy, and UNGGIM and Angegen Secretariat, particularly, of course, Cecile Blake, in organizing this important webinar, a good example, I think, of cooperation between UN organizations. So thank you to all involved. Geographical names are an essential part of spatial data and often key to linking data sets. They also reflect our languages, culture, and heritage, so are important to record and consider preserving. For the full benefit of standardization, it's essential that the spelling and application of toponyms be clear, unambiguous, and authorized for national and international use. And Angegen's vision is for every country to establish a process of standardizing their geographical names while upholding the values of inclusion and collaboration. Webinars are currently a great tool for instruction and discussion, and you are in very good hands today with Peter Gameltoft and his team of Cecile and Johnny. So I wish everyone, wherever you are located, an interesting experience this morning, and trust that you take away some useful thoughts and inspiration, I hope, that can be applied to administering a geographical names program in your country. We hope too that we shall see you again in future events organized by Angegen, perhaps even at a division or global session. So thank you and good luck to everybody. And I hand back now to Cecile.
Okay, thank you so very much, Helen, for your very welcome opening remarks. Okay, time is of the essence, so I'll be moving along very quickly. We'll be speaking today. I'll be starting. I'll be saying a little bit about CARIGEO and Angegen, and then that's the setting of the scene. And then I'll hand over to Peter and Johnny. And Peter will lead the discussions right on, the presentations right onto the discussions, onto the closing remarks. So I'm now going to change slides. So I'm going to end this slideshow and I am going to share my other presentation, which is about, so can you see my current screen? Okay, wonderful. I'm not hearing anyone, but I think my screen is being shared. So I'll go very quickly through this presentation and to put everything in perspective in terms of both groups. It's a collaborative exercise. CARIGEO is an initiative from UNGGM Americas, and it's about improving our geospatial capacities at the national level for Caribbean countries and to leverage the skills within the region, outside the region, building on past projects. And it is being done by a collaborative exercise with a number of partners, universities, the private sector, national organizations, and it's all here. Of course, we have the UN group of from ECLAC. We have ECLAC Trinidad and Tobago based in the Caribbean. We have CARICOM universities. So it's a very strong group of partners. And in terms of what CARIGEO does, it has a work plan, an action plan, and it's based on and aligned to the UNGGIM frameworks that I've shown here. Of course, the PRIME framework, the Integrated Geospatial Information Framework, the Statistical Framework, the Geodetic Reference, and the Strategic. So all these frameworks are taken into consideration when the project was developed in terms of its objectives, and you will see similarities in terms of the objectives, in terms of looking at governance and policies. So it's supporting the implementation of the IGF and all these frameworks. And of course, the synergies that come from working also with UNGGIM Americas. So that is what CARIGEO is really about, and that is why it was important to create the link with Ongegen to strengthen the understanding and awareness of names and what it means for Caribbean countries. And we recognize that within Ongegen, we did not have strong support from the Caribbean. We only had about 3 or 4 countries represented. So we thought going through this Caribbean project, we would be able to reach some more countries to make them more aware of what geographical name standardization means. And I'm just sharing 2 postcards that Ongegen prepared: a map, a name, and identity. This is New York in so many different names, because what names does is to provide you an identity. And that's what Ongegen does to support countries in the standardization of their naming practices. And so Ongegen is really one of the many subsidiary bodies of ECOSOC. It is supported by the UNS, the United Nations Statistical division that provides secretariat support. And of course, Ongegen has been around from a very long time. You will note from the slide 1959, when ECOSOC resolution thought that they should bring together experts because of the naming issues coming out after the Second World War. And it has evolved in terms of how it operates, its structure over the years. And many persons will think that Ongegen is about making decisions on names, but it is not. And we do not arbitrate over names dispute or have political issues, decide on political issues with regards to name. What Ongegen is really about is to encourage the creation of national name authorities backed by legislation. And it respects the local usage of names. And all of these rules and aims are codified into resolutions that have been passed and supported by ECOSOC over the years. And an important part of the work that Ongegen does is to develop single scientifically based systems for Romanization, especially for languages that are not Roman languages. This is an important part of Ongegen's work. of course, Ongegen is I consider it to be a very big machinery. It consists of a bureau, and it has 24 linguistic and geographic divisions, and it has a number of working groups. The working groups, of course, change over time based on the needs and what is happening, and it has some special teams that focuses on Africa and guidelines for mappers. And of course, there's the Ongegen Bureau on our chair, who and we have 2 vice chairs and 2 rapporteurs who really do quite a bit of work. And of course, this is our working groups and the divisions. And you'll note that some divisions are linguistic and some are based on geography. And a country can be a member of more than one division. So if you're not a member, you're representing a country here today and you're not a member of a division, you should find out which division you'd like to become. And because, of course, like I think Jamaica, who is a member of Ongegen, it's a member of the United Kingdom division. I don't know why. So maybe you want to create a Caribbean division. And of course, Ongegen works a lot with Malaysian organizations, quite a bit of them, because we understand that collaboration and partnership is very important. And these are some of the organizations with which it works. Importantly, Ongegen's website has a very rich repository of information on geographical name standardization. And I think at one time an expert said to me that Ongegen's website is the best website for geographical name standardization that exists. So we're very happy about that. But I would like to draw your attention to the manuals that are available, freely available, and can be downloaded, and they're available in other languages other than English. You can visit the website at this link and you'll see it. And we also have an online training course that is self-paced that you can go and do. It was developed in collaboration with the International Cartographic Association, first released in 2012, and it is self-paced and you can go and do it. We invite you to go and do it. And of course, with the UNSD support, when funds are available, the experts from Ongegen will go into country on their invitation and host training sessions, which was done in 2017 and 2018 in Brazil and in the Philippines. And Ongegen has evolved over time, as I said earlier, and one of the most recent things that the group did was it reorganized itself. It usually have conferences and it changed its entire structure to be more agile and more responsive. And most importantly, early this year in May, its strategic plan was approved. It's a strategic plan that spans from 2021 to 2029. So it's more or less also aligned to the sustainable development goals. And the group is now working towards have its plan implemented. So I'm inviting you to join Ongegen, to contribute to its work, to become engaged, and to visit its website and see what is happening and to see how geographical names can support your national development. You'll hear a little bit more in detail, but this was just to give you an overview and to put into context what is CARIGEO and what is Ongegen. So I thank you, and I'm going to now end my slideshow, and I am going to assign Peter as a presenter. And so, Peter, I'm now handing over to you to begin your presentation. Thank you very much.
I just can't share any content right now. I'm not allowed to.
I did send you sharing privileges.
Nope. Not got many.
You didn't get it?
I have a share content button that I can't press, so.
Cecile, did you right-click on Peter in the participant list?
All right, I'm going to try again.
Okay.
While we're waiting, you forgot to mention the bulletin as well. I think that's a really good place to get some information on what's going on right now in the Ungegen world as well.
Are you now? I've just
I'm
passed it to you.
absolutely there. Yes, I'll just share right away. And share there. And you see.
Yes, we can see your screen.
Excellent, and thank you very much. And let's see, just take this away. Thank you very much for letting me and Johnny speak today. Perhaps we should just introduce ourselves. So I'll start with myself. I'm Peter Gamtoft. I am the scientific manager of the Norwegian language collection, and I'm a Norwegian delegate of Ungegen. I used to be a Danish delegate, but I switched workplace to Norway, so now I'm a Norwegian delegate instead. To start off with the topic today, which is geographical name standardization supporting national development, I'd like to continue where Cecile left and continue with setting the scene. What we actually need also, since both Johnny and I come from say like the academic side of geographical names standardization, we are going to move into this field of more also including the character of names and the soul of names, to show that names are more than just mere simple attribute data to geospatial data. So without further ado, I will head off. And here with this first setting the scene, I'll start with talking a little about definitions, why standardize, a little about language, identity, and power. Definitions today, we'll be discussing geographical names. We'll probably also be using the term place names or even toponyms. They are exactly covering exactly the same terms. They are just three different ways of designating the concept of geographical names. Ungegen uses geographical names officially, but many people, I think most people, probably use place names, and so you'll hear everything. And if later with the Q&A, you will be able to say both geographical names, place names, and toponyms will understand everything. Geographical names are applied to mappable areas, anything that can be mapped either as point lines and polygons. And they may designate either an exact extent like a building or a landed plot, or have a fuzzy extent as, for instance, a mountain or a river system or something like that. They cover any type of feature, such as natural, cultural features, as well as administrative units, which is a really important part. And they can even be expanded to include buildings and what is normally called points of interest that are often left without outside of the realm of names. Okay, why should we standardize geographical names? And I'll start off with a bit of a riddle, or certainly a little amusing entrance to why standardize. If I hear someone from somewhere in Caribbean saying Curacao, what are they talking about? If I didn't know my maps, if I didn't know my geography, I would automatically think or try to imagine in my head what the name was. So is it Curacao? Curacao? Is it spelled that way? Or is it spelled that way? No, not at all. It's actually spelt Curacao as you would do in Portuguese. This is the name of an area in the Caribbean. It also has that is the official language form, but it also has a name form which is in the local pidgin language, which is Koso, which is slightly different in pronunciation and quite different in its written form. And here we see all of us right away that we actually have a problem if we want to represent standardized names, and also what is standardized. Is it the Portuguese form, or is it the local how should we say it, language or dialect form, or Creole form? How will we spell it? How would we know how to spell it? If we didn't know what the standard form is, how would we spell it? And we can only know it through education and through learning. So through seeing what's written on maps, seeing what's written in books, seeing what's written in teaching material, that is the way to actually for people to get an idea of what is actually standardized names and what are the name forms you should use and which are not officially used. Another reason for standardizing is that we will achieve clarity, consistency, and conservation of geographical names. And that's very important in a world where we need systems and stable approaches to life and to administration. Standardized names also avoid confusion and mistakes, especially confusions that can occur when you have emergency situations, such as a hurricane, for instance, or flooding, heavy rains, volcanic eruptions, whatever. And it gives you a control that we would not have otherwise. For instance, if we look to Somalia, we have lots of different possible ways of spelling different names because of either different languages, different ways of standardizing norms, or other reasons as well. There could also be other scripts that render the form quite different. And there it will be very difficult to perhaps distribute emergency equipment and relief to a place like Zudur or Hudur, whatever it's pronounced, because it has so many different forms and we have to account for them all. On a more, say, like national level, and probably what states like is geographical names are actually nation defining, and they create an identity. So if we have a nation that is new, geographical names is excellent in defining what the nation is and also creating a new identity, an identity for that particular country. Norway, even though it's a very old country, only regained its independence in 1905, and that's right from the start. Geographical name standardization became very important and was elevated to the highest levels of government in order to be able to help defining what Norway was and mapping out what is in effect a whole new entity. If we have to standardize, and we should standardize, we should include all official languages in the country, even whether it's one or several. And we should also include acknowledged minority languages because they are at the outset in a very precarious position and also not necessarily always being heard or seen. And one way of actually showing minority names and bringing them forward onto maps is a way of actually giving them a voice and an identity. Standardization should also be according to legal definitions, and it is also important to consider whether the inclusion of international language forms or geographical names outside of your country is a necessary thing or not. Yesterday there was a meeting in the Asia Southeast Division, and there was this slide was actually being shown there, and I thought it was really good, so I chose to show it as well. And that relates to Ungiggen's work. In the Ungiggen resolution, one of the key ones, 1/4, has a wide set of recommendations for geographical name standardizations. In 1/4D, it focuses on multilingual areas, and there it recommends that the countries, as I mentioned just before, determine the geographical names in each of the official languages and other appropriate languages, and also given a clear indication of the equality and the precedence of officially acknowledged names, and also to publish these and make them openly available. And this is really essential for what we're going to talk about today. Now to the more soft part of geographical names, and it's talking about the nature. Geographical names are a natural part of our language, and we can't survive without geographical names. We can't communicate as to where we've been, where we're going, where we are, if we're not using geographical names. We can't communicate concepts of society without using geographical names. Geographical name is not just the sort of property to one language or to one period. They may transcend time over thousands of years. They may be borrowed from one language into another. For instance, the German name Köln, which you probably know in the English form Cologne, is actually from Latin originally as a Colonia Agrippina. And it just shows you how names evolve over time and become morphed into the grain of language, and still able to transcend languages and move into other languages in different forms. So therefore, geographical names may vary from language to language. For instance, we all know Vienna, but locally in Austria, it's known as Wien. At the same time, we may have multiple forms for the same locality in one and the same language. And the map showing on the right side, you see from Norway, where you have an elevation that has two names because of how it appears from one side to the other. From the southwestern side, it's a gentle slope, so there it has one name. From the other side, it's a very steep and very ragged and mountain, and therefore it has quite a different name. So from the gentle sloping side, it's called an elevation or a hill, and from the other side, it's called a peak. And that just shows you how the same locality may have different names in either as a result of different aspects, but also perhaps different languages or different dialects. At any rate, if you have a geographical names management system, it must be able to cope with all these elements. With more than one name for a place, or several names, or one name for a place, and also one name may also cover different localities. But if we stay with one name for a place, we should be able to have parallel names, also show which is the principal names and what are the alternative names, and possibly even register historical names in as much that is important for the standardization of geographical names. How do we standardize geographical names? Especially when we have more than just one established spelling. If we have a situation where you don't have a very fixed spelling, then you quite often have different kinds of spellings. And how do you determine which is the one to go for? Sometimes official standards can help, like if you have a standardized language, then certainly that will help in determining for what is what if there are words in the names that are recognizable, and also the combinations of letters will determine how a name should be standardized. But should national standards always apply, or should we take local or traditional spellings into account as well? At any rate, geographical names in standardization should be treated individually, and they should be treated by linguists basically in all levels of case handling, and I'll return to that later. If we return to identity, on the top level, geographical names are part of our intangible cultural heritage, and we actually have a UNESCO convention safeguarding that. But they are identity to all of us, and especially important for minorities is to have the right and the possibility of actually using their name forms for their localities, for the world they live in, is very important, because they are often rendered invisible. And sometimes even when they're given official approval, as you can see on the picture on top, this is a sign of a municipality in northern Norway, where the top form is actually the North Sami, and the bottom name is Standard Norwegian. In a few months after this sign was put up, someone had tried to erase the Sami name form by shooting the name out. Of course, the sign was replaced pretty shortly after, but here you just see that names are very much embedded in identity, and also spur very serious and feelings in people that often have high emotional effects on people. They're also tradition, geographical names, because they're coined by people, they're used by people, and they're also owned by the people as a collective. And that's very important to take into matter, to think of geographical name standardization also as a safeguarding, because the worst thing you can really have is unscrupulous property developers starting to change names because they don't like how things sound. Many geographical names are very old, and they're rooted in history, and should also be preserved for that. And if they're interpreted, they actually tell us stories from the past. And the top picture is actually a road sign from the Shetland Islands, the northernmost archipelago of Scotland, where you have a place called Tingwall, and that's actually from Scandinavian in origin, and that actually means the Parliament field or the Parliament area. As I mentioned before, people also identify with geographical names, and they react to changes. And if you notice the bottom map, you see that this is from Northern Ireland, and there's actually a name at the bottom, partly painted out. It's actually the form Londonderry, and that is actually the traditional Protestant form, whereas the Catholics use the form Derry. And here you actually see how people react to feeling left out of the decision, and then take matters into their own hands and actually commit crimes to feel that they have their identity. Geographical names are very much also power. Who defines what is shown officially and on maps? And here we see an example from Northern Norway, where you actually have one majority language and two minority languages, or one is actually an indigenous language, and the indigenous language is shown first. Then we have the majority Norwegian language, and then the minority language in the end. And there are, for different kinds of localities, different sets of rules to show which is being shown first and second and third, and so on. Geographical names is very much power as well, and where you have conflicts on that are territorial, then you quite often have linguistic conflict as well. For instance, here in the Caribbean, we have a conflict over this island called Navassa Island, which is claimed by the US and also claimed by Cuba. The US calls it Navassa Island, and Cuba called it Navas or La Navas. There we have a territorial conflict that also has some element of geographical names conflict as well. Okay, that's enough for me right now. I'll hand you over to Johnny.
Well, thank you very much, Peter. Also, I would like to thank the organizers here for the invitation. I'll just start with a very few words about myself. I'm Johnny Jacobsen. I'm from the University of Copenhagen in Denmark, where I work with geographical names. I'm also in the Danish Place Name Committee as part of the Secretariat and a Danish representative to Ungegen. Today I will form a sort of a break in Peter's speech, as I will concentrate on the part here on the significance and benefits of geographical names within the areas of language, culture, history, and tourism. Since Peter will be controlling the PowerPoint, I will every now and then say, next please, and then hopefully he will change the slide. Yes, it works, great. So we'll start off with the value of geographical names, and the most obvious one is, of course, that it has a practical function, helping us identifying specific places in a linguistic context, be it oral or written. And we have had this need throughout times. We have it today, and if we have the next, please. This need has also been way back in history. So we need to know what place we are talking about. And the next, please. But apart from that, place names or geographical names are also important elements in language itself. For instance, as a source to language history in prehistoric times. And if you go on, please. In the case of Denmark, we hardly have any written sources in the Danish language from before the mid-13th century. And we virtually have none whatsoever from before 800. So to know about how the Danish language was formed and worked in times before that, if you take the next, please, we actually have to look for the place names, because in Denmark, yeah, you can go back to Fornebu. Yes, please. We have about 1,000 place names from before 800, where we have no other written sources, and another 3,000 from before the mid 13th century. So about 4,000 place names, geographical names altogether from this period, where it actually forms the most vital source to ancient Danish language, both in terms of vocabulary of the actual words existing in those days, because these are used as word elements in the names, but also in the grammar of how these word elements are inflected and coined in names. And of course, these names, we don't have any, they're not preserved through sources from before this time either, but the name itself, even though it's not recorded until later in the Middle Ages or even later, it still reflects how the language was working in prehistoric times. So in this sense, an extremely important source. If you go on. Also, as Peter showed examples of, the names may tell us something about the society and the world at the time when they were coined. For instance, on society structures, religious practices that we otherwise wouldn't have known about. Another Danish example is the name Odense, which actually have several fellow names with the exact same meaning, like Vojens, but spelled in a different way. And they all derive from the meaning Odin's Vi, or the sanctuary of Odin, the chief Nordic god, suggesting a much more widespread and organized veneration of this god in Denmark from before 1000 than otherwise known, have we not had the place names. Also, many names would give an insight to the contemporary people's beliefs, feelings, and attitudes, and perhaps even ambitions. For instance, in the case of the name Greenland, which actually is said in some of the Old Norse sagas that the name was given, perhaps not by an interpret real estate manager as here, but more or less because it was given in the hope that it would attract more settlers to come to Greenland than would have perhaps come if they had given it a name describing how the conditions actually were at this time. If you move on, please. So, as I hope I've shown here, place names are not just practical or neutral identifiers of places, because they are also a vital element of our language, both historically and present, and living tokens of our society, culture, and collective identity, which makes it very important to protect this place name heritage as a part of our cultural heritage. Next, please. And personally, I think the most interesting part is when place names can show you what happens when different languages and cultures meet or even clash. Next one, please. As at the time when Scandinavian settlers in the Viking Age went to England and made an awful lot of settlements there, naming them, many of them, in their old language. So if you take the next one, please. Meaning that today, when you find a settlement, a village, call something in by or thorp as the suffix or the generic element, Toft and Thwaite and Holm and Beck and so on, you would be guessing pretty good if you thought, well, this was probably an Old Norse, an old Scandinavian settlement going back to the Viking Age. Whereas if you find names in Ton, and Ham, and Ing, and so on, they're more likely Old Anglo-Saxon name formed in the Old English language. So in this case with Danethorpe, well, there's a lot of suggestions that this was in fact a settlement formed by Danes back in the Viking Age. But if we go on to the next, it's not always this straightforward, and this is what I think also makes it interesting to see how languages actually mix in such a culture meeting. For instance, in the top case of Normanton, just looking at the generic element ton, you would suspect this to be an Old English and Anglo-Saxon settlement, because this is an Old English generic element, ton, meaning village. And even the first element, the specific one, also is actually an Old English word. But the meaning of the name is the village of the Norwegian, pointing to that this was in fact a Scandinavian settlement. Also the next two cases of Grimsby and Grimston, with a Scandinavian and with an Old English generic and B and ton, but with the same Old Norse specific element, the personal name Grima, and with the exact same meaning. So why would one be named Grimsby and why would the other one be named Grimston? We don't know, but it's actually the same meaning, the same name, being made in two different languages. The same with Saxby. It's actually a reverse Normanton, we would call it, in the sense that it's an Old Norse name, but actually having with the meaning village of the Saxons. So it should it be termed as a Scandinavian settlement or an Old English settlement? Well, it's difficult to say. And I no need to continue here, but this also shows that it's not just the presence of geographical names in a foreign language by itself that's interesting, but also the names' actual contextual meaning and how they are coined and their hybrid combinations in different languages in the same name. All this together provide a unique insight to the reality in which these names were originally formed. Next one, please. Moving on to a case on the colonial place naming in the Caribbean. And I will especially be focusing on what used to be the Danish West Indies, nowadays US Virgin Islands. But just to give you some different examples of how a geographical name can change or continue, because there are sort of 4 or 5 different ways for this to happen when a new culture, a new language sort of takes over. In the case of St. Croix, as it's called today, the original name, as far as I could figure out, was I, the Taino language, meaning river. But when the Spanish took over, it became the Isla de la Santa Cruz, the island of the Holy Cross. Completely new meaning and completely new name. Another possibility would have been to simply continue the name as it was, which happened for the town of Charlotte Amalie on St. Thomas. From the Danish times, when it was taken over by the Americans, it was still named Charlotte Amalie, probably pronounced in a different way, but spelled in completely the same. The same with, or a third possibility would be to translate the name into the new language. So Santa Cruz became Saint Croix when it was taken over by the French from the Spanish. And when later on the island passed on to Danish administration, they sort of continued the French name. It was not translated into a Danish the Hellige Kors, the island of the Holy Cross, but instead it was sort of with a Danish pronunciation from Saint Croix to Saint Croix. and the same method was sort of used by the Americans as into St. Croix when it became American in 1917. And a fifth and final solution would be to simply have different name forms for the same place at the same time. So, for instance, the island of St. John would have been called St. John also during the time of the Danish administration, when it was in an English language context. But in the Danish language context, it would be Sankt Jan. So there's also the possibility of simply having several name forms going on at the same time. Next one, please. In a post-colonial setting, there's also the question of, should we change names or not? And I will continue with examples from the, well, Danish West Indies. It should have been, I think the auto spelling thing has changed something here, but it was actually called the Danish West Indies, nowadays US Virgin Islands, sold from Denmark to the US in 1917. Now the group of islands themselves was given a complete new name from Dansk Vestindien, Danish West India, to US Virgin Islands. So that was one way of doing it. Also, we see the full continuation of a name with Charlotte Amalie, but also the other main towns of the islands, Christiansted to Christiansted, Frederiksted to Friedrichsted, pronounced in a different way but spelled in the same. We also have the case of parallel naming for numerous streets in the three towns. For instance, Kongensgade, now also in King Street, so it's a simple translation, whereas Dronningens has been given the name Seventh Day Street. If it had been a translation, it would have been Queen Street instead. So there are different ways of doing it. And if you go on, please. But the argument, oh, can you go back one, please? Thank you. Because in a post-colonial context, there's also the argument for change. First of all, there can be a negative colonial connotation with the old colonial geographical names that you may want to get rid of. Another problem is if the new the post-colonial context has a different language, there can be difficulties in the pronunciation of the old names. And I would imagine many people in the US Virgin Islands having some problems with some of the street names in the old Danish forms. And certainly there would be an obscure meaning to many of them. For instance, in the case of Tore Strait, which originally used to be Torve Stræde in Danish, meaning the lane leading to the market square, but this meaning is more or less lost in the present form. So there's many arguments to change these names, but also I think there are arguments for their continuation. First of all, the cultural heritage built in the names, like it or not, with the colonial past, this was actually a bit of an important bit of the past of these places that these names existed and were used. Also, there's an attraction nowadays for tourists, tourist industry with sort of colonial tourism, both from, in this case, from mainland USA for tourists coming over, perhaps seeing these Danish names as some sort of exotic feature to the place, but certainly also for tourists coming from Denmark, recognizing these names, and not just the names themselves, but actually also the signs on which they are printed, because this is what you would expect to find street signs in Copenhagen or any other Danish town even today. This type of signs are going back to the late 19th, early 20th century. Okay, if you move on. My last case will be on the border region between Denmark and Germany, Schleswig, where you have names in both the Danish and the German language. And if you go on, please. I will not go through the very complicated history of this area, just list the points here for yourself to see. And all this means that for most localities here, you would have a name in both the German language and in the Danish language. Nowadays, the border is represented by the black line here. So you have a part of this region on the Danish side and a part of the region on the German side. And if you go on, this means that we have sort of parallel names in Danish and German, but also for some of the areas in the Frisian language. Some of these double names have actually been fabricated for political reasons after 1864, when it was all German, and after 1920, when half of it became Danish again. But nowadays, of course, the choice of formal name follows the current national border. And as we have already heard from Peter, UN recommends the acknowledgement of minority language communities and their place names to be respected and acknowledged. Other arguments that could be put in is, again, tourism. On both sides, of course, Danish tourists go to Schleswig on the German side, and German tourists go to Sønderjylland on the Danish side. And it would help for them to identify places if it's written also in their own language, it's believed, or at least it would sort of attractive to the tourists to see their own names on the other side. Also, more recently, there has been an attempt to make some sort of borderland identity to the entire region on both sides of the national border, because this region has been a mixed region in culture and language, going back as far as, well, anyone can follow in the written sources. And to sort of sustain this borderland identity, it would be also helpful to see both name forms on street signs and so on. The idea to introduce these names has been implemented on the German side. As you see, the yellow sign here with Flensburg in German and Flensborg with smaller writings below this. That's the Danish form. But it's the attempts to do the same on the Danish side has not been as successful yet. If you just move on. Yes, you will see that signs have been put up on the Danish sides, but usually they have been vandalized or cut down soon after. I have no recollection of any being actually shot at, as the example Peter showed from Norway, but still there's certainly a lot of tension going on in certain groups of society, and perhaps especially on the Danish side, against the German language sort of coming back and being reintroduced in geographical names, are not liked by everyone. But the Danish mapping institution has actually now recently put in the German forms of about 100 names, I think, on the Danish side. So if you look at the digital maps, you will actually also find the German forms alongside the Danish forms now. So we are slowly getting there. Okay, I think that was all from me. So I will. I don't know if it's time for pizza or if it's time for the break, but it was time for a break. Excellent.
Yes, you guessed right. Johnny, we'll have a 5-minute break, so we will re-adjourn around 1:15, and I will take over again and speaking about the framework for effective geographical name standardization. Det var godt, Johnny.
Mange tak, og i lige måde. Du har stadig den festlige karibiske skjorte på, kan jeg se.
Ja, jeg har ikke fået den vasket endnu, så.
Nej, det skal man heller ikke over. Det er jo klimavenligt at lade være med at overdrive brugen af vaskemidler.
Ja, nemlig.
Du havde problemer med at logge på, eller hvad?
I understand Danish, Johnny.
Okay, excellent.
No, that's a joke. That's a joke.
No, we are not saying anything naughty, I think, so that would not be a problem. I was just complimenting Peter for his choice of shirt. It's very nice.
He has on a pretty shirt again today.
Yeah. As always, he's always very well dressed, I think.
That's a lie, but
I even see you have your suitcase right. Right
no,
there.
it's not my suitcase. It's one of the old dialectologists' suitcase. It was used for exhibition, and it's never left my office.
What is in that suitcase, Peter?
It's some dialect notes and some books that this person was using, and lists this person was using in recording dialect words and phrases throughout Norway.
Okay, there's this movie, My Fair Lady, where the linguist who taught the lady how to change from speaking Cockney to English, standard English. Do you know that movie?
Yeah.
And they had some instruments that they used to record the various different sounds, or I don't know what you call them, from various parts in the UK.
Yeah. Yeah. So
that box has similar things.
yeah, something like that. It certainly has a pen and a pencil, and then and a notation block at least. So, but the reason for recording the dialects in Norway was not to make them speak correctly, but rather to actually give the local variants a voice and legitimacy in schools and in
Okay.
education. So it's quite extraordinary for Norway. So they actually usually call the dialect paradise of Scandinavia, because they accept dialects much more than they do in Sweden and Denmark.
Okay.
So it's pretty good. So nobody will ever correct if you said the Rhine in Spines mainly on the Plines in equivalent dialectal Norwegian, unless of course you're from Bergen, because nobody likes the Bergen dialects.
So have you learned the Bergen dialect now you live there?
No.
Because you don't like it either.
No, it is quite it's quite challenging to learn, and some areas have very strange R sounds that I can't pronounce. So almost like Dutch. So
Dutch is hard to pronounce.
no, but the R sounds are very hard to pronounce for Danes.
Okay.
It will
So,
give you a sore throat if you try.
So in standard Danish, I would say this town I live in was called Bergen. But in standard Norwegian, if we can say such a thing, it's called Bergen. But in some dialects here in Bergen, it's called Bergen. And when you meet people and say, "Hey, it's good to see you," and then they say the same, and they say "Bære hyggeligt" or "Bære hyggeligt," and that is a really difficult sound to pronounce for Danes. So that's one of the reasons. But otherwise, they have a syntax that's quite common to Danish. They only have 2 genders in this town, whereas just outside of the city limits they have 3. And that's because it's an old merchant town with a lot of low German influence, just like for Denmark.
Bergen pronunciation doesn't sound too Corona friendly. I mean, you have a, yeah.
No, but we were also all at home for 8 months, so we wouldn't have been able to relay that to each other either.
Good.
So I'll just start setting up the PowerPoint again. And remember to push the share button. Yeah.
Thank you for managing the PowerPoint very well.
Yeah, I did it sort of okay. I did a couple of mistakes, but it's always a challenge. That.
It's tricky when it's almost the same slide that come up with the small and you don't know about it.
Exactly.
When it's 5 minutes up, Peter?
They are up now, yeah. So I think we'll just get started. I will just introduce the remainder of what I'm going to talk about very quickly. And it is basically to introduce what is needed for effective geographical name standardization. And don't be scared when I show you how much it takes, because it is on paper very much. But of course, various different systems, different countries, different backgrounds gives reason to different kinds of geographical name standardization. So I'm basically showing you the maximum model of what is needed, but smaller, more agile systems can also be used. And let's just start. As far as I can see, there are 4 things that have to be fulfilled in order to have an effective framework of geographical names standardization. And 2 of these actually go together hand in hand, and that's B and C. But first and foremost, I think it's necessary to have legal requirements in place, and then also have the administrative requirements in place to standardize, and at the same time have the scientific backing for making correct and sustainable decisions. And if we're talking about modern days, where everything is related to data management as well, it's very important to have an IT backing of either an IT group or IT persons that will be able to assist you whenever the need be. The legal requirements can be either in the form of a law or, say, like a departmental order, something like that. And the really important thing is to say something about the objective, and also what the legal requirements for decision making and disseminations are. The administrative requirements is basically to have a national names authority. That can be either centralized or decentralized. I'll show examples of this later. But the names authority should consist of certainly a secretariat that assists the authority, and it should also have a group of workers. It could also have some subcommittees or branches or advisors, as shown this chart. The scientific backing can either be an expert group outside of the actual names advisory committee, but it could also be part of the actual committee. And it could all either be an expert group, it could also be a dedicated research group, as in Copenhagen, where Johnny works, where they're associated university. Here in Norway, they are more associated, the Language Council, than anything else. Also, there's also linguistics experts at the National Mapping Agency. For IT, it's important to have the programs to create the systems that are being used, but also to have enough maintenance to keep the servers up and running and the underlying software updated. Otherwise, you will be in dire straits after a short while. And also, you should have some, certainly in the developing time, some front-end programming with user experience tests, so to have a system that people actually feel comfortable with and find easy to use. I'll go a little more into the various parts here. On the legal and administrative requirements, as I said, geographical names law is imperative, and also to have the administration, and then of course always to have an IT department or IT person to help you. For inspiration on geographical names, I would encourage you to go to the Ungegen website, go to the bulletin in 2018, which is a special section edition on legislation on geographical names. Here, 11 member states present their geographical names regulations. As you can see, there's much variation, and it's all down to state management system, whether it's centralized or decentralized, whether it's a monolingual or multilingual society, whether it is whether it has a very fixed written system or not. So all these factors combine the various needs for regulations. One thing that could also be good to look at is for Sweden, the rules for good practice in geographical names. Names Matters, which is a very good book that's available freely on the internet. We can share the link later. And also, when we're talking about laws, and I think this is mentioned also in the bulletin, a geographical name should be as concise and clear as possible in its purpose. And from the geographical names laws, the objective of the laws is often to safeguard geographical names as linguistic cultural heritage, or to give geographical names a suitable written form. The law also often says something about dissemination and what official languages or what languages should be used on maps and in gazetteers, and how they are applied in multilingual areas and so on. The coverage is interesting because some regulations actually say that there's just one language. Some have provisions for official language, minority languages, and so forth. For geographical areas, it's important to have what areas are included and what are excluded. Most countries deal with geographical names within their own national borders, but sometimes you actually have areas where you have regional languages, like in Denmark. So for Denmark, there's actually 3 independent geographical names boards, one for Denmark, one for Greenland, and one for the Faroe Islands. And also, who does the law apply to? For instance, is it for official use or for private use as well? Who should be using standardized geographical names? Should it just be the state? Should it be regions, municipalities, and so on? And who decides on them? And different types of names are often decided on by different levels of state. So quite often municipalities decide on street names and names of squares and quarters in their own area, whereas the state takes care of what is important for state matters, especially when they have like statistics and other things like that to take care of. And they should be applicable to public organizations. Most laws have provisions for this, and also which might sound slightly odd, but many laws actually say that they should be used. The standardized names should be used in school books, and this is the what I started off with. This is actually something that has to do with education and learning what is actually the standardized form of a name. Just touched upon it, but different bodies may decide different types of names. And it is very common to have this distinction, certainly between government/state and then local government. There's often that distinction in most countries. Standardization is not just a top-down process. It should also be some element of bottom-up process, because even though expert groups have a generally good idea on how to standardize names, they don't always get it right. Local traditions, local pronunciations may warrant a change in standardization. So therefore, there should be case handling procedures for the Secretariat and the Geographical Names Authority. And also there should be provisions for who can complain, what level does the complaint has to come from, and who handles the complaints, and in which way are they handled. For instance, someone says to the local administration that this name is completely wrong. We don't say this, we say something else. So the local administration would say, well, we have different spellings here, so what is the correct spelling? And then they send it on to the Geographical Names Board, who starts a hearing process or something similar. And for instance, for Norway, it would be the relevant institution prepares an announcement, that's usually the Secretariat, that announcement that publishes the necessary information about the case. It's published for official hearing, and then the hearing results are sent to the group of experts who give recommendations on the right name or the right spelling, and then the decision-making body make their decision, and then that's published. And if there are no complaints, then it's registered in the Geographical Names database, and it's standard. Also, if you really want to do something good for public participation, always include them in every part of the process, and also perhaps use something like crowdsourcing or name collection, so that local name forms are brought to the fore and actually being used also officially. And some countries have apps where people can, applications that people can register geographical names and report mistakes. For instance, in Norway, there's an application called Redikartet, means correct the map.no, where it's possible to say this is wrong, and then they make a case out of this based on this report. The decision making is one important factor, but I think just as important factor is to have a dissemination routine where for announcement of standardization, standardized names, changes or additions to standardized names. And there should be clear requirements for where they are published, whether it should be in paper or paper and digital, what channels they are using for disseminating this. Usually geographical names and Ungegend says that this is best practice to enter the names into a register, gazetteer, or database. And there should be public access to the geographical names register as well. And again, a Norwegian application is norskart.no, which means Norwegian map, where you see all the name forms that are standardized and entered into the geographical names register. And you can see metadata around them as well when you click the names. I've added a checklist here. I won't go into it, but since I hope we can share the PowerPoint after, the geographical names register, or the requirements for law is, as far as I can see, around tenfold, and this is what should be written into the law as how to manage geographical names. You can have other elements, you can take some out and so on, but this is generally what is needed. When it comes to the actual administration itself, when we have the law in place, then you have the administration. Then you have to have the practical administration, which is basically the secretariat. They are the ones that handle cases, make sure that the cases are correct. They keep records. So they have an archival function, and they also have a minute-taking function in the decision making. And they also usually call the meetings, and they handle decisions and make sure they're disseminated correctly. This is a really, really important function, and this is one that needs to be in place. And it doesn't need to be a part of the actual names authority, but it certainly should be an assisting function. And here you see, and this is courtesy of Helen Careford. This is a chart of centralized names authority, where you see this office or secretariat, basically on the side of the national names authority, but it's a central part of it. And then a central names authority might have branches or subcommittees. It may have advisors that are not necessarily a permanent part of the authority, but one they can call on whenever the need be. Sometimes advisors are also part of the National Names Authority, as Johnny will be able to confirm for the Danish Place Name Committee. We can also have a decentralized names authority, and that is very common in countries where you have a more decentralized system. For instance, Spain, where you have probably a national authority, but it delegates most of its work into regional committees that have their own regulations, sub-regulations. They also have their own offices and possibly also their own system, just like for the centralized system, but just on a regional level as well. And in principle, you could have basically a local level as well, but I can't recollect ever seeing any. But at all times, you have the general national names authority, and then the national office secretariat related to it as well. But it's basically the two models you can operate from. The actual advisory board, the actual geographical names authority, you can call the actual names administration. Here you can either have the group of experts or advisory group anchored within the actual names authority, or you can have it as an individual institution that can be called upon when need be. The group of experts are in charge of the scientific scrutiny, and also handles and sets out the principles of revision and principles of advice, and they report it. Then they take it down to the names authority, who then evaluates the material, makes a deliberation, and makes a decision. And once that's been published and nobody objects to it, then it basically moves down into the IT department, because that's where the data or the decisions are stored. Also, if there's a rejection, for instance. But it's very important to have, as part of the framework, some IT backing or department that can help with development, but especially maintenance. And this is sometimes forgotten, and this is why sometimes geographical name standardization is not top-notch, because the actual part has been missing here. I'll just say something briefly about the communication strategies. It is very important to actually communicate what are standardized geographical names, especially because then we have clarity and we know what people are talking about, even if we have several name forms for the same locality. So we should have, certainly as a minimum, an official meeting for decisions. And this is where geographical names changes, additions, or deductions are published and announced. And quite often this takes place in legal publications, but it can also be entered into a gazetteer that functions in the same way. And they're quite often distributed through relevant government institutions. Many geographical names authorities also have a dedicated homepage where not only is the same information relayed here, but it's also a place that is used to raise awareness of geographical names, that you have articles about geographical names, and also where people can keep updated about legal matters and also up-and-coming cases and ongoing cases and so on. And where you can actually announce that this case is ongoing, and if you want to have a wish to have a say in this matter, then you can make your voice heard by going here or there. And also, it's a really good place to have an archive of geographical names, their changes, their historicity, and so on. And this is where Johnny works right now. Has a really extensive archive on geographical names. And in my current work, I'm actually building one right now. And not that we don't have an archive, we have a substantial archive, but it's just not collected and seen in Unity yet, and that's what I'm working with right now. Also, to go into social media, that is a good idea for spreading news and raising awareness, particularly if you have matters that need decision relatively quickly, and you have a short time frame. Then spreading news through social media could be a good idea. Or if you have a good contact to local media or something like that. Networking is extremely important and something that is not focused much on in the actual geographical name standardization information. But it is actually really good because it can help you solve problems, because your network can give you assistance, especially when you have naming issues. If you have contacts, local contacts that can either tell you more about the issue or give you information about who to contact that knows better, and so on. And it also helps you seeing behind the naming issue itself, because sometimes it's not actually the name that's the problem, but there's some sort of conflict underlying it that is very important to actually have control of before actually saying something about the naming issue, otherwise, or the naming problem, because otherwise you'll just continue perpetrating the actual conflicts. There should also it's also very important to have the network to provide guidance, so that we can spread help and inspiration, news, and also we can have data provided by our networks on if we want to replenish our standardized geographical names base. If we want to go down into minor names, that is a really good way to use your networks to provide you with this data. But the problem solving is really key, and I'll just finish off here by quoting a longtime member of the Ungegen, Paul Woodman, who talks about conflicts, and this is a key to understanding how to solve problems. And he says, it's axiomatic to state that many of the problems associated with political and cultural toponymy have the events of history as a root cause. History has left us a legacy of ongoing toponymic disputes and problems. Yet, although history provides the origin of these difficulties, it doesn't tell the whole story. There's a more proximate cause of our present-day problems, namely the lenses and filters we have applied in our approach to history. And whereas these facts of history can't be altered, we are able, if we wish, to modify or reappraise our perceptions and perspective, and accordingly our memory. Memory is therefore a crucial component in toponymy, one which a toponymist can usefully study for its own sakes, both in broad brush and in close detail. And I think this is really cleverly said about how we can actually help solving conflicts, because, as I said, quite often the geographical name is not the problem, it's the underlying history, causes, and perceptions of the name. And this is where I think networking is really important, because this is the key to actually seeing under the name and into the problem, and go on from there. I'll just finish with just saying something about another aspect of network and information, that's the cooperation. Of course, geographical names authorities cooperate with the state or the government or a government department that says itself. But one thing also good to cooperate with is actually non-governmental organizations in specific matters, and certainly with the people. The people are key to actually have a stable geographical names standardized body of names. But there's also the international side, and of course I'd like to raise attention to the two organizing parties here today, UNGGIM and Ungegen. They're all participation by state appointment. But if you want to have also an insight into name research and onomastics, then it's a good idea to actually participate in something called ICOS, which is the International Council of Onomastic Sciences, which was which finished for 2 days ago. We had a week-long conference of very interesting papers and very relevant papers to geographical name standardization in various aspects as well. And I think this is now the time for wrap-up. And yes, I did run a couple of minutes over. Sorry about that. If you feel I rushed through it, you're right. But I have no qualms in sharing the PowerPoint with you, and I'm sure Johnny doesn't have any qualms either. So I leave this to you, and then I think we can go on to actually the wrapping up part and the discussion. So let's have the discussion right away. Let's see, can I stop share?
Okay. Thank you very much, Peter and Johnny, for your presentations. I know that 45 an hour and 45 minutes is not a long time to talk about geographical name standardization. So this was like a little snippet in terms of the gamut of knowledge that exists in the discipline in terms of what geographical name standardization is all about and various aspects, some of which you have not touched on. Yeah. And we are inviting our attendees, which I'm seeing we're at 103 persons. There must be some questions that you would like to ask. And remember, no question is a stupid question. So please feel free. Maybe there was a term that you did not understand. I'm sorry, I should actually turn on my video. So maybe there was a term that you did not understand that you would like Peter to explain, or Johnny. There's a question you have in terms of a challenge that you have and you'd like to, find out more. Please, this is your opportunity. You have two experts here with you, and I know we have a number of other Ungagen members who have joined us. Some veteran retired persons. Helen, who started, was our trainer before, and we have Ferhan on the line from the Netherlands, who has coordinated Ungagen training for many years. And so we have the expertise here to answer your questions. There's one question that's in the chat, Peter and Johnny, from Paulino. I do not know if you'd like to address that question.
I can do that. And thank you very much, Cecile. I would say that perhaps you should consider yourself lucky, because Johnny and I could go on for hours. So perhaps it's a good idea just to limit it to 2 hours venues just for your sake. But to return to Mozambique, the question goes, in Mozambique, many geographical names are not in the official language Portuguese, but are from the Bantu language. I'd like to know what would be the best way to standardize, in the spelling of the Bantu languages or in the spelling of the official Portuguese. Remember that we have already spelling of Bantu languages that are taught in schools, but they are not official languages. Thank you very much, Paulino. I would say the very best way to standardize would be in the Bantu language. And since you already have you have spelling, you have probably even spelling regulations for Bantu. I know that there was a project in the neighboring country of Zimbabwe in establishing a Bantu dictionary. It was headed from Norway in its time. So I don't know whether that can be used for anything, but I should think that the very best is to use the language that is actually used for these names and then have them standardized. Of course, you'll probably have parallel names, both Portuguese names or origin names, and then you have parallel Bantu names, and of course they should be shown together. But I think that's the most sensible way. But of course it's entirely up to the regulations.
Okay. Remember, you can raise your hands if you have questions that you would like to speak, or if you would like to put questions in the chat. Don't be shy. Or if there are no questions from our participants, I would like to ask a question. One of the things that has always dawned on me since I joined the UN and I've started to work with Ungagen was the fact that I found that countries in Europe and in Asia feel very strongly about their place names. But I do not get the feeling that countries within the Caribbean, where I come from, have that same seem liking or feel so strongly about the names of the places in their country. I do not know, based on your studies, Johnny, in the previous Danish colonies, why do you think the name standardizing geographical names may not be such an important part of the work that we do in our mapping or culture or heritage organizations?
It's difficult to say what has made the difference here. I acknowledge that for many Caribbean communities, it's the sort of the same language that continues after the change, and because of that, you may have a different approach to the cultural heritage that's in the name. Many of the sort of Danish place names forms found in the U.S. Virgin Islands today would not have been spelled that way in modern Danish. So it's a sort of a standstill picture of how it would have looked back in the early 20th century. But and then I expected it to sort of go in different directions on how to spell them today. I know there's been a couple of attempts to reform the street names in the U.S. Virgin Islands, especially in Charlotte Amalie on St. Thomas. One was up just after the sale to the U.S., but it was actually and there was a complete list of all the new names that should have been introduced instead, but that was not implemented, and I believe the reason for that was the protection of the cultural heritage in the old names. But then a new attempt was made, I think in the 1990s, when this parallel system of both English and Danish names on the street signs were put up, which I think is actually a quite good idea. But it's it must be difficult to have sort of the standardization in a language that you are not really that familiar with anymore. So that would certainly provide a problem to the authorities.
Okay. Heather, do you have anything to contribute? Thank you very much, Johnny, to the question I asked. What's the power behind the name standardization? Why is it important?
It's important in the same way as you have regulations for spelling your language, or you have conventions, because it gives you predictability, it gives you clarity, and it gives you control of your names, in as much as you can avert disasters and so on. So that is the main part. That is the formal part. Then you have the human part, is and it actually invokes identity. Of now you say that there's not much identity in geographical names in the Caribbean, but perhaps in recent years the Caribbeans have not entered into much conflict with each others, so you don't have because if there's something that raises awareness, it's being shown that the other part is also present, and certainly with geographical names, this is one way of showing it. So you don't really necessarily have that. Another aspect in the Caribbean could also be that they're not really part of your identity. These names, they're given you by other nations, or perhaps they don't matter as much as for in Europe, where geographical names are basically the way to define you as a nation. It may not be the same everywhere, and perhaps the Caribbean is different, which might be a really good idea. But at any rate, standardization is really important, because if we don't have standards, then we just run the risk of having a situation like in Somalia, where you have perhaps 4 or 5 different established forms for places, and you have to take them all into account. For instance, if you want to have emergency services, if you have statistics, are you sure you actually find the right place every time, and so on? So that is basically the reason administration needs standardization.
Okay, Peter and Johnny, we have a number of questions now.
Yes.
You can read them in the chat. You can go ahead. I know you can navigate. The first one is from ECLAC. Is it possible to download vector files with points or polygons with standardized geographical names? And if yes, at what level would it be available? National, subnational cities? Thank you.
Yes. For the Scandinavian countries, I think there's usually an official body that's related to the national mapping agencies, that from where you can download all sorts of different data sets, and then you have also a geographical names data set you can download and then use for whatever purpose you need. That is a really good thing, because it actually brings standardized forms out into use. So this is so yes, you can download vector files with standardized geographical names, and Johnny and I have done that for years with working with GIS and geographical names.
Okay, the next question is from Asad Ali. He says, in Pakistan, we have not yet established national naming authorities. We're trying our level best to establish a national names authority. As Pakistan is multilingual, multicultural, and having diverse identities, what would you suggest how to proceed and establish?
It depends entirely on, and I apologize for not knowing enough about the state system of Pakistan, but if Pakistan is a very regionalized country with regional governments, it could be a good idea to have the individual geographical names boards there, but with an umbrella law that states what needs to be part of geographical name standardization, so that we get the closest possible geographical name standardization. If it's not a decentralized system, then you will need to have a geographical names board, and then I would say a group of experts that are associated, that can be called upon in each individual case for advice. Because otherwise, since you have many linguistic minorities, and you have different cultures, and then it's very difficult to have a board that encompasses all possible experts. Therefore, I think you should have a geographical names board and an associated expert group or group of experts that may be associated in, say, like regional universities or regional official bodies.
Okay. There's one more question from Mozambique, and they're asking, I would like to ask, where can we start? We just have a national authority, but we don't have technicians and resources.
Yes, that is a big issue. I presume there is some sort of basic geographical names management, geospatial management in Mozambique. And it could be an idea to have certainly contact those and hear what the possibilities are. Otherwise, it's possible to ask for aid from different countries. For instance, I am currently involved in a project in Moldova in Europe for establishing a geographical names system and a new mapping system and law and everything. And this is financed by the Norwegian state. So it's if you have these cooperations with other nations on then it's a possibility to inquire whether it's possible to actually have funding or co-funding from other countries to help you get started with geographical name standardization or geospatial management.
Okay, thank you very much.
Hi.
There's a question. Go ahead,
Yeah,
please.
good morning from Tonga. I just have I'm from representing Ministry of Lands. I just have a question because here in Tonga, like having the name being culturally identified by each person is a very big thing. So each village, we have a story behind every name. Hence why everyone identifies with each village, tying into that name. But currently, we're still working
Serena,
on
1 minute. Serena, may I interrupt you, please? I'm asking for your
Yes, sure.
consideration. We're going to ask participants to hold 1 minute. We're just going to do some housekeeping. We are supposed to close at 12. We're going to invite Daniel Takari from ECLAC to give closing remarks. I'm asking you and others who have questions to stay online. Please don't log off. So we're just going to do, it is very unconventional, but we're going to ask you to be patient, and we're going to invite Mr. Takari from ECLAC to give his closing remarks. So is Daniel online? I'm asking you to hold your question. Don't go. Please go ahead, Daniel. Thank you very much.
Good morning to everyone. Thank you, Cecile, and sorry for this inconvenient action regarding the closing remarks for the event. But let me thank you all, and on behalf of Mr. Rolando Campo, Director of ECLAC Statistics Division, I would like to thank you all for your participation and contribution to this relevant meeting, and make a special acknowledgement to our speakers for sharing high-level messages, their knowledge, and their experience. Helen Kerfoot, Peter Gammeltoft, Johnny Jacobsen, thank you very much for this valuable information and opening in the discussion in the context of geographical names and standardization. I would also like to thank Paloma Merodio for her opening remarks and the UNGGIM America's permanent support to the geospatial development of the region. And of course, to our colleague, Cecile Blake, and her wonderful moderation into the entire session, her continued support over the years, and her worthful thoughts and perspective on this fundamental matter. I take this opportunity to congratulate the CARIGEO initiative and the work carried out by the steering group during this last year, planning activities, looking for partners, elaborating project proposals, and organizing dissemination events for the Caribbean region. From the Economic Commission for Latin America and the Caribbean, we are fully committed to achieve the overall CARIGEO vision to increase resilience through the strengthening of geospatial information management, to support decision-making in favor of disaster risk reduction, action for climate change, and economic and sustainable development. In this age of rapid technological change, geographical names are a basic reference. Effective communication from person to person and many fields of activity such as planning, cadastre, tourism, education, emergency services, culture, among others, require quick access to understandable and unambiguous toponymic framework. Moreover, in the perspective from the 2030 Agenda, standardized geographical names are crucial to achieving the Sustainable Development Goals, which cannot be monitored without solid and reliable data on geographical names. Besides the scientific field, geographical names involve an even more significant meaning regarding identity, cultural heritage, and human diversity, delivering to the present context of space, linking history to places, reviving events, and honoring the heritage and language diversity. Therefore, the common understanding and agreement of geographical names for many society members is fundamental to achieve a harmonized relationship among society, economy, and environment sectors, allowing an efficient communication for governments, academia, public and private sectors considering culture and heritage. I appreciate your attention to these final words, and once again, thank you for the opportunity to share this valuable discussion with the geographical community in the Caribbean. Thank you all, and thank you, Cecile. I'm sorry for this interruption during this discussion session.
Thank you very much for being here with us, and we do appreciate ECLAC's support, commitment, and continued contribution. Bye.
Okay, thank you. Thank you all.
Okay, thank you very much. So may we have now the representative from Tonga to ask her question, please? Can we have her back online?
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you for your patience. Please go ahead. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Oh no, so my question is just because we're still trying to create a national geospatial information framework, and we do have the Ministry of Lands looking over all the geographical names currently used by the country, but then we're still working on creating postal addresses as well. I just want to look at the administration side because the idea is to have a national team or administration team that looks over all this. Would it be okay to create one without overarching a current ministry that looks over the overall administration of geographical names? Just looking at the fact that Tonga, we only have one language and everyone identifies with just the same name for everywhere. But looking at the fact that if we create another existing body, would that override our existing ministry that looks over the current system being used? That is my question. Thank you.
Do you want to answer that, Johnny, or should I?
Well, I think it's probably more your leak on the administration side of it.
Okay. So you have this governmental body that actually oversees various aspects of geographical names, but then you also feel you have the need to actually use the power of geographical names in as much as they are also a very significant cultural part. Is that how I understand it? I would say this sounds almost like that this could be an advisory board to the actual governmental agency, so that an advisory board is established to take care of the traditions and also to ensure that the geographical names are administered correctly and it's the correct names that are being used. But to create like an advisory board rather than a entirely new organization, the problem of establishing something outside of the governmental system is it's difficult to get funding. But if you are within the system, you may not have a lot of funding, but you will have some funding to establish. So I think it's a good idea, but the cultural aspect is extremely important with geographical names. And should you need inspiration, also perhaps contact our New Zealand colleagues, because they have been doing a lot of work with Maori names the last many years, and I think they are doing really excellent work for actually taking into account the Maori feeling and use of names, which is not exactly the same as as what the other part of New Zealand necessarily feels, because that, as far as I can see, that they are quite different in as much, because we in Denmark, for instance, or in Norway, we don't necessarily have much tradition associated with each name. We don't associate stories with the names or anything. For us, they are more like labels of information to some time in history, but we don't have stories associated to them, only to a few of them. So that it is very difficult. It is very different. So it's very important to take your side into account, because if the stories are also tying itself to the name, then the form of the name also relates to the story told. So it's very important to put both into account, I think.
Okay, thank you very much. Have he answered has he answered your question?
Yes, he has, clearly. Thank you.
Okay, wonderful. Peter and Johnny, we have a hand raised. We have Mr. Glendon Newsom. He's the Director of Surveys and Mapping in Jamaica. Can we have Glendon taking the floor? Mr. Newsom, welcome.
And good morning, afternoon now in New York. Good morning to you, Cecile, the rest of your colleague presenters, and all the participants, fellow participants. I'm not, well, I may have a question in the end, but I would just wanted to comment on the fact that you had mentioned in your presentation that that Jamaica is a member of the, is it the UK group or region?
Yes.
And you're wondering in your own mind as to perhaps why that may have been. And then it occurred to me that it could very well have to do with our colonial past. Because when you think, for example, of our, starting with our county names, they are Cornwall, Middlesex, and Surrey. And I'm not sure about Cornwall, but I'm certain that Middlesex and Surrey are county names in the UK. And then there are places like Ipswich and Manchester. So all of those names are associated with the UK, and that may in part carry that explanation. But just for your panelists too, there are names which I suppose have to do with other things. And I'll give an example. There's a place in a parish called Colonial, and the place is called Mina Senya You No Come. Also, for a little English interpretation, it really means I did not send you, so you should not come. Now that is actually a place name, right? So yeah, it's very interesting, the various issues, the languages, the culture, the history, you know, from which some of these names will emanate. But I just wanted to know now, and I suppose this might be my question, does the names of streets fall within the remit of UNGN, GEGN? That's another thing, because we haven't touched on that. And what we're noticing, for example, in Jamaica is that streets are, some of them are losing their traditional names, which are grounded in some of the significance of issues that we mentioned earlier on, and they are now being changed to persons' names, athletes and that type of thing. So the question is, do these names fall within the remit of your committee? Thank you very much.
They fall within the remit of standardization. There's no doubt about that. But in many countries, they fall under the local governments. And if Jamaica is a really great nation for sports, so you do have many athletes, and it's tempting for many local government areas to actually name after their heroes. But there are recommendations in place in Ungegen that actually can help you regulate this aspect. I think it is problematic also if there's not some sort of control on what's being named and renamed, but I think you have to have that written into law, because quite often this is relegated down to the local government areas. And unless you have really strict provisions for what can be done and what can't be done, for instance, naming after athletes, then you're usually naming after living persons. But there's actually a resolution, Ungegen resolution, that says that you shouldn't name after name geographical names, and that's including streets, after living persons. But you should wait until they are no longer here, and by a little margin as well, like 5 or 6 years. One of our old colleagues, Johnny and my old colleague, said we need this time for the skeletons to come out of the closet, and if no skeletons come out, we can name after them. And I think that's a really good way of saying it, that you never know whether you're naming after a crook, after all, because they have all their life in front of them. So that is important. But I think this they should be standardized, but they are usually part of local government because there's so many names and streets to name, and there are also new streets coming up all the time. And of course, it's okay to name after those. In Scandinavia, there's often a tendency to name in like after certain elements. Like you have areas that name after flowers, and you have quarters that are named after birds or fish or something like that. But you can also use the local toponymy, say like micro toponymy, and say we name these streets after the actual fields they are built upon. So on.
Okay, thank you very much.
Okay, thank you very much, Mr. Newsom, and thanks for joining us all the way from Jamaica and representing the Caribbean. We have a question from your colleague, or Milton Saunders. Milton says, the challenge with having public participation in verifying place names is always validating what is contributed. Personal and political interests may oftentimes come to the fore, and there is always a need to filter that out. How is that dealt with? Public participation, though, is good. This is in relation to a point Pedder made, where he stated it is important to also encourage public participation. Over to you, Pedder.
Yes, public participation is a way of filtering out certainly the political side of things, because if there's a political wish of changing a name to something else, then the local population will probably not like that very much. On the other hand, there may be the personal aspect there, so you need to have more than just one local person saying that this is how it should be. You should basically have hear from several people saying that this is okay. In Denmark, correct me if I'm wrong, Johnny, but I think that is handled through letting the local government actually submit cases, and then they are the guarantee for this is actually a local wish for a change. That is one possibility. That's one possibility of taking the personal thing out, because if you didn't have this provision, then you might face a single individual thinking, I want this name change, and then claiming that this has always been the case. And if you don't contact the other local inhabitants, then you will never know whether this is correct or not. But certainly having some sort of balanced, like public participation, but also have some control over how cases are dealt with is a possibility. But certainly public participation should be anticipated always, because this is really the key to actually getting a correct and as stable standardization as possible. Because if we don't have it, we'll be reverting backwards and forwards, or face the risk of doing that, certainly.
Okay, I think Mr. Newsom also has his hand up. I don't know if it is from his first intervention, or does he have another question, Mr. Newsom? Did you take your hand down, or did you put it back up?
I will be doing so in a moment. Sorry about that, please. I'll be taking it down.
Okay, then. Thank you very much. I'm not seeing any more questions or any more raised hands. I know that Adriana had her camera on. I do not know if she had a question. Do you have a question, Adriana Vescovo? No? Well, I think we're now at the end. We went over by 17 minutes. I know that Daniel gave closing remarks. I do not know if Peter and Johnny has any closing words they'd like to give before I finally say bye-bye. A minute. Johnny, would you like to say something? Peter, no, you are finished?
I can say something, but I think Johnny should speak first. He's not said very much.
But just if anyone would be interested in having any further questions or so on, you are certainly free to contact me, and also on the question of the colonial and post-colonial naming problems and so on. I would be very interested in discussing this, because I think perhaps these historical names sometimes provide a different setting for how to deal with standardization, for instance, of names that no longer exist. So how to deal with that in a historical context. So please feel free to contact me on that. And you, Peter?
Okay. Peter,
I
final closing
second.
remarks?
Yeah, I second Johnny in saying that if you have a further question, don't hesitate contacting me. And also, should you want some sort of further webinar or something like that, or if you know of a conference that may interest people like Johnny and me, please do let us know, because we're always very happy to participate and to share our knowledge. And but certainly, if you have further questions, if you have you feel the need to further seminars or webinars, do contact us and Ungegen, and we'll see what we can do.
Okay. Thank you everyone from joining us across the world, in Asia, in Europe, in Africa, in the Caribbean, North America. Thank you. 108 persons join us today.
Don't
We
forget the
really
Pacific.
and the Pacific, yes, Tonga, it should have been very late in the night or early morning. So thank you all very much. And we hope to see you sometime again. I just also would like to share with you that we'll be having another CARIGEO session. And our next CARIGEO session will be on, let me see if I can find my PowerPoint. If Peter will allow me to share, I could share, but I'll just say on Thursday, Thursday the 15th of April. No, this is not right. We'll be having another CARIGEO session. Stay tuned. It will be talking about his third in the series, where we'll be talking about the Caribbean Geospatial Portal sometime in September. So you'll hear more about it. And thank you all very much, and bye.
Bye.
Thank you, everyone.
Bye.
Goodbye.
Bye. Bye. Bye from Uganda.
Goodbye. Thank you.